Well, welcome back. Today we're going to be reacting to the debate, is feminism making lonely and sad women? And as you may or may not know, I am not a supporter of feminists or feminism. And we're having a little look here today at the diary of a CEO who has got some pretty heated conversation on it. I have seen some outtakes. I've commented on some outtakes. I have not seen the whole thing. Let's react to it this morning. By the way, guys, if you don't know me already, my name is Maelstrom. I am a psychologist in the making. I have a qualification in education, and I'm a professional life coach here to help people to change their lives around healing trauma, narcissistic abuse, to name but a few. If you're interested in checking out any of my work, take a little look at the links below. Let's get started on the video today.
The feminism movement didn't unite women, it split women.
Totally agree.
Wait, listen, 50% of young women don't want to have children. They're really preoccupied with making money and materialism.
But we're still looking at a society that is increasingly telling women where they could be better.
But sometimes feminism expects women to be prioritised, and both sexes want the privileges without the responsibilities.
Well, can I just add, we are producing women and men who are and I'll tell you what I mean by that. It'll be an interesting discussion.
We're joined by three leading and outspoken voices in female societal issues with very different opinions.
To unpack the choices and consequences women face in modern society.
The sexual revolution gave women freedom.
But things like the washing machine, women entering the labour force, the pill had enormous social changes. For instance, it gave the illusion that sex was consequence-free.
But the second wave of the feminist movement was every woman should want free sex, and yet 82% of young women are depressed and anxious after casual sexual encounters. Or every woman should want to go out to work and leave their children in daycare. But we are doing terrible damage to our children by putting them in daycare.
This strain of feminism has basically aspired as much as possible to make women like men. And now gender roles are changing.
And we've gone so far, so we have women dominating men.
How are we dominating men, though?
Oh my goodness. 60% of college students are women.
That's not us dominating
No,
women.
let me finish. Young men are afraid of women and the power they have over them.
Oh, God, to blame feminism for those things. I mean, it's insane.
But there are solutions.
I'm just going to jump in there and talk about a report that came out in 2025. And this was really shocking. What are your thoughts about this?
Okay.
So,
First of all,
Oh, it's gonna be a good one.
Can you define for me what you mean by sexual revolution for anybody that doesn't know? Because it's going to be quite an important term today.
Right. So I think that there are two things, really. The ideological event, really, of the 1960s and 1970s. So this was a period of, not just in relation to sexual relationships, but all sorts of things, a period of really questioning and challenging traditional ideas, and particularly traditional Christian ideas about what sexual relationships ought to look like. I think actually the point that we've reached in terms of progressive culture is the assumption that those traditional ideas are necessarily questionable, are necessarily fit to be challenged. I think that's the ideological thing that we're talking about. But there's this other thing that happens at the same time, which is partially connected, which is a material change. So you have the introduction of the pill, the advent of safe abortion. Remember, historically, abortion is not safe. So you have the advent of safe abortion, and of course, it's decriminalization. You have things like the washing machine and central heating and all sorts of other domestic appliances, domestic technologies.
So the false liberation, in my mind, of women in the 1960s, where we started to put fake hormones, fake steroidal hormones into our bodies to stop a really important monthly process of us going through ovulation, is in no way, shape or form a liberation. What I have noticed from personal experience and anecdotally from all the women that I've worked with is that when we started these medications, we were sold them under this guise of it being freedom, of it being something that was progressive, of it being liberal, and it being something that wasn't a big deal. And actually, what has been seen is that the majority, a lot of women that go on these medications suffer really quite severe mental health issues as a result of being on steroidal hormones and contraception. And also, not only that, but we're also kind of like scuppering our natural cycles. So if you could imagine about suppressing testosterone, for instance, how mental men would be. We don't need to imagine, because we're living presently in assault on testosterone. And if you look around at most of the men who are not typically full of testosterone, you can see that they are overweight, high in fat, and mentally unstable and unwell. So we don't need to imagine that. When we take away the core composite hormones that are required for a healthy, happy, biological male, female, not good things happen. Not good things happen. So when we're suppressing these hormones, what we see a lot with women is mental health issues, a lot of depressive cycles, a lot of over-anxiety, neuroticism. And also something that's not talked about very often is actually that women who are on steroid or contraception, they actually have different attractions. So, but what we see typically is that women who are on steroid or contraception is that they have attraction to men who are not as masculine. And so men who you kind of like maybe typically describe as being metrosexual or more effeminate, those are the men that women who are on contraceptions are attracted to. And we have this phenomena that's happened in the last sort of 50, 60 years of women who are coming off of birth control for the first time in their lives to have children with their husbands. And then they realize they're not actually attracted to their husbands because their attraction, their mindset, their mental state has been skewed by the medication that they're on. How is that something that is freeing or positive or good? I don't know. And that's not even to get into the whole kind of idea of the fact that now that we've got contraception and there's not really kind of like any concerns about who you're copulating in, we now have a society that is rife with degeneracy because we've taken that moral component out of Christian ideals. And it doesn't have to be Christian ideals. We see these ideals about not copulating with every Tom, Dick and Harry across all scriptures. There's no kind of, weird cults. There's not very many, legitimate theological backgrounds that suggest that free sex and love and having sex with everybody is a good idea, because it isn't a good idea. From a spiritual perspective, every time that you have sex with somebody, you're tying yourself to that person spiritually. You're creating a spiritual bond with them. So what do you think happens when you go and do that with, 50 people, 100 people, 1,000 people? Looking at you here, Bonnie Blue. Nothing good, by the way. Nothing good comes from it. Sex is, you should be able to have sex, go around fucking everybody. That's freedom, that's liberation. That's not freedom or liberation. What that is it's an imprisonment. It's an imprisonment in the newfound cult that we all live in. I remember when I was a kid, I grew up in the church. So, I had these, and I think we all come from a Christian country. So, if you're a British person, you've probably been socially conditioned in some way, shape or form to have Christian ideologies inside your mind. And, as somebody that grew up in the church, the idea that your body was a temple, that your body was sacred, that sexuality was something that was to be sexual was to be something that was private and special, and that you shouldn't just go and give your body to anybody. Now, that was how my brain was conditioned in the beginning, okay? And then when we started watching films and TV and all of this kind of like, the new cult started to come in with kind of ideas of degeneracy. Then suddenly my mind changed from being like, okay, my body's a temple, to actually, I can do whatever I want. I should go around fucking everybody. That, that to have more sexual partners shows that you're this, this person that's wanted and desired. And that is more important than anything else in the world, particularly as a woman. If you're not desired by men, then your worth is nothing. And what? What the fuck? Like, I think sometimes, like, some of the things that I think sometimes, ironically, feminism is trying to, push up against, because they say that this has been something, the way that women are viewed by men, oh God, it's a patriarchal thing. And it's like, okay, but actually, because instead of feminists in the origin fighting for female rights, for protections of their bodies and protections of what is sacred within ourselves from a spiritual and sort of holy non-theistic perspective, we've gone down this route of I'm a woman and I have rights and I should be able to do whatever the hell I want. And actually that is the thing that has created the feedback cycle where we are now just viewed as sexual objects. Because when you behave like a sex object and you act like a sex object and you push yourself as a sex object, of course that is all you're going to be seen as. And I'm aware a lot of feminists will probably be like, yeah, but that's men's fault. And it's like, is it though? I don't think men forced women to go on birth control. You know, I don't know what the the intentions of the original women that went on birth control was, but I think that the idea that now I can have sex with no repercussions didn't leave us down a very good path, and I don't think it led men down a very good path either. And I want to be really clear, this isn't about us and theming, okay? This is about men and women coming together as a community. And I think the problem with feminism is like, I'm an egalitarianist, okay? It's a whole different ballgame. Why? Because it's about everybody. Feminism is literally about females, okay? And I'm a female. I love women. I want to protect women. I love men. I want to protect men. But if we have something that is coming from a perspective where in the title it's only confirming one thing, and you're consistently blaming the patriarchy, men, there is no, how can you find common ground with 50% of society when you're coming from a position of hatefulness, lack of compassion, and blame? I mean, you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. And I find that a lot of fucking feminists are vinegar. Like, very vinegary. Pickled, they're so vinegary.
I am best known as the host of the Guilty Feminist podcast. And I started that podcast to learn about feminism. And I have since researched...
Just be a total bitch. Like, she reminds me of, like, the pantomime dame. Like, I know me here with the bright pink bob. It's like, projection! But she's giving, you know, pantomime dame.
How difficult it is to talk to people on the right now, and how we need to get back in rooms, and we need to be having difficult discussions like this. So it's interesting what Louise says about being raised in a progressive household, but then being disillusioned and thinking that there's some ways in which life was better before the sexual revolution, because I'm effectively a time traveler. I did live before the sexual revolution, because when I was 14, just coming into my puberty, my family joined a religious cult. I didn't have any normal sexual development, and I didn't get out, I didn't escape that patriarchal cult till I was in my mid-20s. So I know what it is, and I do not believe women want it. I know what it is to not have autonomy, to not have agency, and to not have emotional freedom. And those are the three big things that I think the sexual revolution gave.
All right,
women.
so what a traumatic and demented start, okay? And the problem is that, I mean, I don't know what she's got to say, but I think that sometimes when we come from like a demented and traumatic start, we do this thing that I see with my clients a lot, you know, that they swing from this way to the other way, so they have no boundaries, and now they're like a still fucking iron Fort Knox, you know, iron, like, nobody's gonna get to me, fuck off, you know? And it's like, okay, great, you know, we need to do this polarized swing from swing, but like at some point we need to come back to center point. And it sounds a little bit like she's swung voraciously the other way because she was so oppressed, and so maybe she's gone to kind of like abject, you know, from a patriarchal to oppression, maybe she's swung pretty voraciously to the other side of female liberation, and actually she hasn't come back to counterpoint in the middle, which is sense and rationale and logic and healing. You know, when you come to a place of healing, you know, I teach consciousness and esotericism and mysticism. And within esotericism, we have the three layers. So we have the exoteric, which is what we all learn in schools and churches and in a cult. We have the mesoteric, which is the next levels of teachings, and then the esoteric, the esoteric, sorry, at the top. And within that, we recognize at the bottom, all there is duality. So it's God and the devil, it's us and them, it's male and female, it's duality. And when you're in a state of duality, all you can pick is a side. Now, when you come out of this lower level of consciousness, not even really a lower level of consciousness, when you come out of being asleep, you move into the mesoteric, and at the mesoteric, what you realize is actually that there is no objective good or bad, and there is no evil. And when you get up to the third level of the esoteric, which is where God exists and the existence of God, there just is everything. So there is no dualism. And the problem is when people begin to heal and they feel like they get stuck at this lower stage because they think that they're further along than they actually are, they get stuck in this dualistic concept. And this is like people who have like, I've awakened from the Matrix, and then they just are obsessed with conspiracy theories. And it's like, you know, I've been in this where it's like, we need to save the world from the evil cabal. And it's like, well, yeah, we might need to, but actually just by you partaking in that dichotomy of fighting the evil cabal, you're continuing with the evil cabal, because what you resist persists. You have to have two opposing energies to create this force, this argument. So when you have feminism that's coming in and pushing back on the dictatorial patriarchy, actually all that happens is that the dictatorial patriarchy pushes back and the feminists are pushed back. And so things get more and more extreme. And this is what you can see from her, is that she was, you know, she's raised in this patriarchal cult where it's very extreme. And then she goes to the other side, the other extremist side of feminist liberalism with no sense or rationale between the two. And ultimately there's sense and rationale within both parties, and we have to find a common ground where we find what is sensible, what we find is logical, and what we find is practical and actionable for everybody. Yeah, egalitarianism. Everybody. Not just, well, you harmed me once, so now I'm going to harm you. And we see these kind of reflexes quite a lot. You know, you can see this within kind of like, you know, apartheid situations in South Africa, where actually people who have been oppressed during the apartheid are now actually becoming the repressors, you know, and are now doing the exact same thing as what was done to them. How is that? How have you learned anything? And if anything, if you've been oppressed and then you go on to be an oppressor of the people who originally oppressed you, you're probably worse than your original oppressor. Most people who oppressed in the first place were ignorant. If you've been oppressed, you are not ignorant anymore. You're aware of the damage that oppression does. And if you continue to go forth and do something that has been done to you, you're worse than the first person that did it to you in ignorance. Big statement, but fact. In my mind, my very unhumble opinion. But look, if you'd had the life that I'd had and you'd done the study that I've done and you're a fucking autistic genius, you might think the same way as me too. Yeah, and again, so she instead of thinking that there could be something in between these two very strong dichotomies of patriarchal control where women are oppressed, or feminist liberation where the men are oppressed. Maybe nobody could be oppressed. Maybe we could find some common ground where we both feel like we're seen and loved and respected. And she doesn't see that. So she sees that anything that kind of comes back to anything that feels like for her, it feels like the cult that I was in. It feels like patriarchal oppression. Anything that triggers that trauma, she just responds with a shutdown of like, you don't know what it's like. I had no freedom. I had no nothing. I had nothing. But the problem is that when we have a trigger in the in the mainstream here is when when my loving, kind husband told me what to do, it felt like the cult leader that oppressed me when I was a kid. Okay, well, it feels like it, but it's not the same, is it? And if you react to your kind, loving husband in the same way that you react to the cult leader, you're the problem because you haven't healed. We can't react to present day problems with the reaction from past traumas. If you're doing that, you are abusive.
And to not have emotional freedom. And those are the three big things that I think the sexual revolution gave women. First of all, agency. I think it's just agency. Is so important. So agency is just the ability to go around and choose what you do moment to moment.
Moment to moment, though. This is the problem when people don't actually have a pathway in life. You are given lots of things to be involved in, and it's like what feels good in the moment. And this is abject hedonism, you know, where we just go around, this feels good, this feels good, this feels good. And at some point, hedonism always leads down a pretty dark path because it's like, well, it feels good to rob this money from somebody. It feels good to take drugs. It feels good to smash this person's face facing that's upset me. So if you're living moment to moment with no actual direction, and this is kind of what spirituality, consciousness work, or originally religion would have probably given a lot of people, is it gave them a pathway that they're walking down and a reason to be doing what they're doing. So instead of being people who are just choosing things moment to moment because the universe is plopping them in your plate, it doesn't necessarily mean that you should be doing all of those things. You know, and I say this a lot, and it's like, I'll get it fucking printed on a t-shirt, because if you watch my channel, you'll hear it a million times, and we'll say it in the comment: the road to hell is paved with good intentions. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. Autonomy is a beautiful thing as long as it is done with morals, as long as it is done with sense, as long as it is done with logic and rationale, because this is the reason why we have anorexics and we don't just allow them to starve themselves. If you have somebody who is starving themselves, we section them and we force feed them, because yeah, autonomy is a beautiful thing, but if you're mentally unwell and mentally unstable and you're doing harm to yourself, you shouldn't be allowed that autonomy. And unfortunately, I think we have some pretty corrupt, and this is not just feminists, this is like everybody on the fucking planet. Like 85% of the people on this planet are asleep, sleepwalking through life, living a hedonistic lifestyle of just doing what feels good. It feels good, it feels good, which is why everybody's morbidly obese, alcoholic, broke. They've got nothing in their lives. And we're all people just shagging left, right, and center because people are in pain and they're trying to find a painkiller. And our society in the West offers all of these substances and ideas and things to be pushed forward as painkillers. And I'll tell you now, there is no painkiller in this planet, in the material realm, that will work in the same way as you becoming conscious and connecting back to God, your higher self, source, whatever you want to call it. If you have those things, which is what I teach in my academy, these things will heal you, and they will heal you forever. If you take a painkiller, if you take a vitamin, if you take alcohol, if you do gratuitous sex, if you just go from the next thing to the next thing to the next thing in Western society, you'll always be looking for the next thing, because it's never enough. Because the hole cannot be filled with things from the material world. What you need to fill that hole with is with self-love and with connection to your higher self, source, God, spirit, whatever you want to fucking call it. That thing that is bigger than you, that is the same as all of us. And when we reconnect to that thing, you recognize a lot of the things that the Western society pushes towards you does not lead to happiness. It does not lead to fulfillment. And it leaves you feeling empty, miserable, unwhole, and probably, looking like a pantomime dame at 55, unmarried, miserable, no kids, saying, but I got a podcast.
Autonomy is, can I decide what my life looks like, the shape of my life? What choices do I have? And emotional freedom is the third one, and I don't think the sexual revolution did give us emotional freedom, because I think we're still sitting in a lot of guilt as women as to, like, if I'm at work, I should be at home with my children. If I'm at home with my children, am I providing for them financially well enough, or am I going to have a career when I go back to work? If I'm doing both of those things very well, am I a good enough daughter, friend? Am I running a half marathon for charity? Like, we are in a stage of such guilt. That's why my show and one of my books is called The Guilty Feminist, because I felt that feminism had become another thing to feel guilty about.
And this guilt, this is a side effect of Western society, which is actually something that feminism kind of created more problems within, because you're guilty because you're having to do everything and you can't do everything. But that's because loads of us are single mothers, loads of us are trying to work, be a mum, be at home, be a stay-at-home mum, all at the same time, as well as having a life, as well as trying to become a fucking Kim Kardashian. It's like everything that society is pushing towards you, telling you about what you should be, what you should do, what you should have. A lot of that is rooted in not feminism, but is rooted in this kind of like in this cultural phenomenon that has started to begin in around the 1960s with Hollywood, with films, with magazines, and this pushing of what culture should be. And it's like, you don't see this crap in Amish society. I love the Amish, honestly. If you're leave me a comment. Let me know if I can come on holiday and come and see your areas, because your area, that sounds rude. Come and see where you live. I'll promise not to swear so much. Because if you see Amish communities still live in the same way that we kind of did prior to all of these kind of like revolutions that happened that led us to be where we are right now. You know, they lived prior to the Industrial Revolution. They're quite Luddite in their behavior. They don't partake in a lot of what modern society gives you. And they seem very happy people. If I were to go in there and be like, but don't you want to have sex with a load of people? Don't you want to do this? Don't you want to do that? And it's like, actually, a lot of people don't want to do that. The Amish give their kids an opportunity to go off on like a spring break, you know? Do you want to come back? Do you want to go and do whatever and live in the Western world, or do you want to come back? And I think the problem is that so many people in Western society are so brainwashed into thinking that you're living in freedom and happiness, when actually you're not living in freedom and happiness. You're living in a prison that's been created for you by elites, by marketing, by companies that have led you to believe that you're making choices when you're not making any choices for yourself at all. Democracy is a scam. That's not real. You know, it's like, oh, well, you know, at least I'm not living in a dictatorship. Well, we're pretty much living in a dictatorship. It looks like it's freedom, but it's not really. We can't say what we want to do. We can't do what we want to do. We have to get up. We work 40 hours a week doing shit that we don't want to do. It's like, tell me that you're not still in an indentured slave. That's all very inflammatory. I'm sure somebody's going to have something to say about that, but fuck it. So these ideas about like, you know, I'm still oppressed because I have so much to do. Well, maybe if we were still living in families that had a nuclear family, where the kids came home, they weren't expected to be doing 5,000 clubs a week and suddenly having a fucking career. Like, how many kids are doing things because they need to make, you know, they're making money, or they're doing things, or they're trying to get a career before the age of like 16? What are you talking about? You should just be being a child. You know, you shouldn't be going out there doing things because you need to get ready for a career after school. So parents feel the pressure to be doing so much for their children, and then on top of that they feel the pressure to be doing so much for themselves, and then so much socializing and this, that and the other, because if I don't have everything in line, then my life is unfulfilled. But I'll tell you what is most fulfilling from life is quiet, slow, peaceful, spending time with people that you love, and being in nature. Let's just go. I mean, the pandemic was a great time, because it was like, just go back to that for a moment, where people remembered what was important. Because the things that people were missing wasn't wearing their fancy clothes. It wasn't going out getting drunk. It was spending time with their grandmothers, spending time with their partners, spending time with their friends, and being allowed to go outside. Now, when you have those things really truly removed from you, you realize that most of the shit that most of us have been going after in life is pointless. And a lot of the things that she's talking about at the moment are, you know, these are kind of like things that you've been conditioned into thinking. Do you think that pre-industrial revolution, and there's anybody sitting there going like, do you know what I need to do to feel like I'm a worthy part of community? Run a marathon. It's like, no. The reason why we're all doing so much is because we're all desperately unhappy, really, at the root of it. And mostly it's because we've got no family, nobody that, you know, no partners, no spouses that love us. Our relationships have been broken down. Our relationships with our children have been broken down. We're not having children. Our relationships with our parents have been broken down, and community has been broken down. We're all hundreds of millions of little people living in boxes, feeling incredibly sad, tapped into a fucking computer, doing fuck all, seeking community.
And so
Anything
to me that engenders more shame in women or more guilt in women, or takes their autonomy away.
The victimhood stinks. Nobody can make you feel anything. Nobody can make you feel anything unless you already feel it at some level, okay? Stop projecting your own inner shame or guilt or fear or upset or whatever onto being it something else. Oh, somebody else made me feel that way. No. You could sit and shame me for having pink hair all day long. You'd be like, you're a dumb bitch. I don't care. I love my pink hair, you know? If it's not something that I'm already feeling somewhere within myself, there's no amount of you doing anything to me that could make me feel like that. So don't blame everybody else in your society for your unprocessed shit. The thing is to recognize that her experience and what she's talking about is incredibly subjective. You know, is what she's offering, is what she's selling through her kind of guilty feminist kind of stuff, is there any objectivity to it? Because if not, all you're doing is throwing shit that's worked for you at other people and hoping that it sticks. And that isn't helpful. It seems like the other two are actually learned academics on this, and so they'll have a lot more of an objective viewpoint on it, as well as having this subjective opinion because they're women.
Emotional freedom and agency as the byproduct of the sexual revolution. Would you agree with that?
Yes and no. So I think that Can I give an example that is like quite dark, but I think throws us immediately into like some of these really difficult questions about freedom and whose freedom, right? There's this line from Matthew Arnold that I really like. Freedom is a really good horse to ride, but to ride somewhere. Like freedom is to have a purpose, right? And so an example from my professional life, which I think highlights some of the issues about sexual revolution promoting freedom, the law around BDSM. I won't go into the details because it's boring, but there's like complicated law around BDSM, basically. Like, so this is bondage, domination, sadomasochism. So people basically doing consensually violent or abusive things in sex. So stuff that would be illegal if there weren't consent, pretty much. And the law around it is complicated. The law basically says that you can consent up to a certain level of harm. And then above that level of harm, you're criminally liable. And if something goes wrong, like you're done for it. And there's been ongoing campaigns by proponents of sexual freedom to loosen these laws and to make it so that you can consent to more than what you legally can at the moment. So consent to like serious body modifications as a sex thing, or consent to quite serious violence as a sex thing. Like if something goes wrong at the moment, you might be criminally liable. So me and a bunch of other feminists set up a group called We Can't Consent to This. The reason we did this is because there were an increasing number.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly dangerous. I think we have to be really, really careful about, changing laws about BDSM that basically make it easier to harm people. Because it's like once you kind of go down that pathway, if you can consent to harm, can a child consent to, essentially paedophilia? And this is the thing where we sort of start to move down freedom without any kind of sense or logic or rationale. Freedom with nothing else. What did she say? Freedom with no goal? I think we need to be really careful about that. Said road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Which these women died. And these men were getting away with this in the sense that they were successfully claiming, no, this was all just a sex game. And they were successfully avoiding a murder prosecution and sometimes getting very light sentences for manslaughter. And I think this is a really, really good example of freedom for who and freedom for what. Because you can completely see why some campaigners would want the law on BDSM to be much more liberal. And they would say, and they do say, I'm a consenting adult. Who are you to tell me that I can't do X, Y, Z in the bedroom? Who are you to tell me that the law ought to step in and try and criminalize what adults do in the privacy of their own homes? And you can see their argument. But then I say, okay, but the problem is we're all connected to one another and your freedoms impact on mine. And this all, a society is greater than the sum of its parts. And if you're going to say that sexual freedom is the preeminent value, then I don't know what we do in these cases, these concrete cases where it seems to me that a terrible wrong has been done to this woman. And if we don't have illiberal laws, at least partially illiberal laws, then men who make this defense are going to get away with it. And so I'm sorry this is a dark example to kick off the conversation with, but I just think it's a pertinent example of how freedom is difficult and agency is difficult and choice is difficult. And we
And this is the problem. I think that a lot of, where we're at the moment, because we've kind of removed anything that has like an objective moral standard for what is right and what is wrong, because we've taken out kind of like religion or spirituality or whatever from society, is now we've just got like people's opinions about what they think is right and wrong. And if you ask a paedophile, they probably would be like, nah, it's not wrong. It feels good. Hedonism, love it. They don't think about what the impact is of children. And if they maybe had like a 13-year-old that is consenting, it's like, well, she's consenting or he's consenting. It doesn't matter. And it's like, well, it does matter because there's somebody somebody that will utilize those laws and those freedoms to do harm to other people that aren't consenting. And I think that we have, like, at this present moment in time, we have a very, very split society where there's a lot of people that have become so kind of like objectively immoral and so obsessed with freedom that, and it's always subjective. It's always, well, I don't want to be curtailed. I don't want to be curtailed. I don't want to be curtailed. And it's like, that's absolutely fine. But because we allow something, you know, a lot of these people that are calling for things that seem reasonable are reasonable people, and so they can't assume, you know, they can't even understand that if I'm doing some kink with my partner and I'm strangling them, I'm not going to murder that person, and if I did accidentally murder that person, I would own up to it and I'd go through court process. It's like, okay, but because you're objectively not somebody that would utilize that law for your own benefit. But there are really bad people on this planet that will utilize these laws for their own benefit. You know, I think that's why a lot of people are worried about kind of like, you know, the bathroom stuff with transgenderism. Is because there are bad people that will utilize those laws and those liberties to access spaces to do nefarious things. You know, and so we have to be really careful about like what we're allowing, because what we allow across the board. And it's like, if you're a reasonable person, you can't imagine that anybody's going to use these laws to do bad things. But there are bad people that will use laws like this to do bad things, you know?
I can say that these things are good generally. I think they are good generally, but they are virtues that need to be balanced against other virtues. And that's the challenge.
Freedom is a wonderful thing. No one would want to take freedom away from human beings, but excessive freedom without structure is not good for human beings. So I'll use the example because I talk about children a lot. If you raise your children with respect for their will, that is a good thing, right? You don't want to quash their will. You want to support their individuality and support their choices. And even when raising children, you're going to give them choices. Do you want
exactly? And if you have children, what you realize is an act of love is to create boundaries. An act of love is to say no. You know, the being cruel to be kind is a thing. You know, and this is why I say kindness. You know, that be careful, because you know good things lead to hell. Because often when we think we're doing kindness, we're doing kindness. Well, they want it, but they need it. They're crying if I don't give it to them. Okay, well, we're raising really spoiled, horrible little children that expect to get what they want all the time. You know, just because your child wants ice cream and sugar for breakfast, it doesn't mean that you should give them that because they have a paddy, because you don't. And so boundaries, structure, freedom within a structure, freedom with the responsibility of your freedoms is really, really important. You can't just, like, I'm a libertarian at the root, just to be clear. Like, I believe in freedom, and I believe that we should be able, you know, people should be able to do what they want within pretty big structure and pretty good big morals. Because if we don't, we end up in this kind of like, you know, chaotic society where, you know, people that want to murder people are murdering people. Well, why not? That's their right to do whatever they want to do. You know, people who want to rape kids, that's their right to do whatever they want to do. Men who are raping women, that's their right to do whatever they want to do. And I know it sounds extremist. It's like, yeah, but we're not going to get there. That's not what we're fighting for. But it's like, if we just push autonomy and we just push freedom and we push those two things as the most important things as our society, with no objective sounding board or bottom line or platform of objective morals to come off of, that's where we're going to end up. You know, because how can you not end up in a society where we're slowly but surely allowing things that are not right? You know, and I think you know that it's very difficult, because it's like, well, what is objective moralistically? But I think we all kind of know. You know, I think we all kind of know. You know, it kind of reminds me of, you know, what Jesus said is, you know, treat others how you would like to be treated. You know, and if you probably wouldn't want to be strangled in sex, you probably, you know, till you die. Some of us kind of like it. But, you know, you don't want to be strangled in sex until you are dead. You know, you don't want to rape children, or you don't want to be raped as a child. You know, these kind of things you have to kind of, you know, you have to at some point kind of think about the impact that your freedoms may have on other people. And ultimately, in a society that is based on individualism, we don't tend to think very much about the community or what it's doing to our community. We just tend to think about ourselves, which is what we see presently with a lot of people, you know, kind of Karen culture, or people who are who are really not very nice people that are going around inflicting their free will and their right to do whatever on anybody else. And it's like, these people are not nice people. Yeah, they're inflicting their right to scream or shout or be abusive to other people or film people or to be in a space or whatever. But you're not actually thinking about the impact that has on other people. And it's very narcissistic, because when that behavior is done back to those people, they don't like it. Like, I find a lot of people who are kind of in the very liberal, leftist liberal like branch of society, when they're in extremists, they are extremist, they are, and they're quite fascist. They're quite fascist because they want freedoms for themselves, but if you don't fall in line with their ideology, they don't want that freedom for you, and so they'll oppress you. They'll oppress you and they'll be abusive towards you. I had this experience where I posted a comment on something and it was just like, ugh, and it's just like all the dredges of disgusting society comes up because they disagree with you. And so instead of hearing your opinion and recognizing, like, it's your opinion, everybody has a right to opinion, nobody's opinion is necessarily right, we can kind of maybe come to some kind of, objective consensus that that's the majority of the opinion, and if that's the majority, we kind of have to go with that. But like most people who are in a minority and don't want to be oppressed, they actually seem to be quite oppressive in trying to retain or obtain their freedoms. I have, that's my perspective of the people I've had to deal with. And they're extremists, to just be clear. And those extremists are on both sides. Those extremists are on both sides. It's exactly the same for, like, Nazis. They want freedom and supremacy and whatever for themselves. But as soon as somebody else asks for that, it's like, no, you don't get to have that. We all have to have something that is, egalitarianism. We have to have something that is equitable and equality for all of us. But we have to do that in a way that is respectful, but also comes off of a moralistic, a moralistic platform. And ultimately we live in a Western society that has certain ideals. There's certain ideals in other countries, for instance, Middle Eastern countries, that seem that it's okay to marry, young children. I don't think it's right for a 40-year-old man to marry a 9-year-old girl. I don't think it's oppressive of me to say to that man no, because I believe in an objective morality that says that is not moral. Now, I might be completely wrong, and when I go to meet my maker and I die and whatever, I might come out of here and be like, oh, you fucked that right, royally. Those people that were pedos were on the right path. But presently, with what I know and what I feel is in my heart, I don't think that that's morally correct. And it's not oppressive for me to tell that person that what they're doing is wrong. Because freedom with no structure is a problem. Autonomy with no structure is a problem. Because there's always going to be people that are evil and degenerate that want to do bad things. And good people have to call it out and stop it. Because if we don't, where are we going to end up?
For breakfast. Do you want to wear your green pants or your blue pants? No more than that with small children. But if you don't provide any structure for them, they don't feel loved, they don't feel secure, they don't feel stable. And so what I'm afraid of is that we went too far. It's not that freedom isn't a good thing. It's that excessive freedom without...
And to be honest, like, most people are just like children in adults' bodies. They've done no mental work. They haven't been emotionally regulated. They've been raised by emotionally immature parents who haven't taught them anything. And so we've literally got kind of like a whole generation, 2 generations, probably 3 generations from boomers down, of people who are just emotionally immature in adult bodies. And again, this is why we see Karen, kind of Karen culture, of people having fucking hissy fits in the middle of a supermarket because somebody looked at them. It's like, if you're still in that sense of mindset, you are not somebody that should be allowed to make decisions about what happens in society. That's a big statement, but it's like, if you're somebody who's not done any personal work, you shouldn't be allowed to be telling other people who are conscious and aware and have done personal work what is right or wrong, because you don't know. You don't know. You haven't done any bloody personal work yourself. You haven't got a clue what you're talking about.
All can also make us feel untethered, unbound, without connections
Totally
to people that we're most intimate with. And that's my concern. So it's not that sexual freedom isn't a good thing. It's that, in my mind, it may have gone too far.
I think this is what you see in society now, where people are desperately hankering after anything. You know, okay, well, maybe if I have more sex, maybe if I have more items, maybe if I have a bigger car, maybe if I have more followers, maybe if I have more money, maybe then this hole will be filled. And it's like, no, the hole is filled through personal work, through self-development, through discipline, regiment, routine, and following something that's bigger than yourself.
Add to that before you jump in there. Despite the general decline in sex, especially amongst younger people, societal acceptance of casual sex has grown quite rapidly. In the UK, approval of casual sex rose from just 10% in 1999 to 42%.
How to fuck yourself
in
by fucking other
2022.
people.
Yeah.
So when you say rules and structure, Erica, I'm really interested in that turn of phrase, because of course children need rules and structure, but women aren't children.
Here we go. She's a cult victim who's not healed from her trauma. So as soon as she said rules and structure, triggered. And she's like, rules and structures were bad for me. I lived in a cult. Okay. Tell me you're unhealed and you're about to tell everybody else.
Well, we're all children. Men are children too. From a psychoanalyst perspective, there's a child in everyone.
Of course,
yeah.
but I think when we're talking
Booyah,
about
bitch. We're all
rules
children.
and grown women, we are really, really in dangerous water.
Oh, this woman's giving Dunning-Kruger. I'm sorry, I'm going to try and be a bit more objective because I've immediately disliked her. But I've immediately disliked her because I'm just kind of like, you shouldn't be speaking.
Because we are looking at a society that is increasingly closing down on women and telling women where they could do better, be
How?
better.
How is that actually happening? How is that happening? How is that happening? We have more freedoms than we've ever, okay? In court cases, women get the children, okay? They get the houses, they get the spousal support. They have more places in universities, more places in education. Our mental health is better. Our careers are better. We're earning more money than we've ever earned. I don't believe in the gender pay gap. So, and how? Men are the ones who are killing themselves more than anybody else in this society. They are the ones who are more homeless. They are the ones that are receiving less education. They're receiving less support at doctors and GPs for mental health issues. So how is it that women are being more oppressed now than we've ever been oppressed? Like, we can make these massive statements and it can really back up your cognitive dissonance, but I don't think it's true. I don't think it's factually true. And I think it's intellectually disingenuous to sit there and predicate your argument based on something that's a lie. And also, like, go and fucking live in India. Go and fucking live in the Middle East. Don't sit there and tell me that you're oppressed in Western society as a woman, because you're not. We've literally got a 3-woman panel sitting there discussing about the freedoms of women, okay, wearing what they want, saying what they want, doing what they want. And the one man who's facilitating this conversation is shut up, doing as he's told, and just literally leading the conversation. Do not sit there in the abject height of your freedom and tell everybody else who sat there in a panel that we're more oppressed than ever before.
If we're looking at an extreme example, we're looking at Iran in 1970s and women in parliament and women walking around as part of the sexual revolution in miniskirts and having a wonderful time. And then you're looking at women in Iran now, you're looking at women in Afghanistan now. Women in Afghanistan now have rules and they have structure. They can't stand near a window. They can't leave the house without a man. They can't they can't use their voice in public. They can't sing. Like, anything that says rules to me, I'm immediately like, firstly, our society has plenty of structure. We have a lot of structure. We all have to work to
Nothing to do with feminism. Hysterically, women didn't have to work to earn a living. Until all those women went, we don't want to stay in the home anymore and be housemakers and look after our kids. We want to go out there and work. So it's like, what?
We are all encouraged into monogamous relationships, and there's a feel that you're
I don't think societally we are encouraged into monogamous relationships, because everything in our culture is hookup culture. It's hookup culture. And if what we're encouraged into is like serial monogamy. You know, is like, if that guy doesn't work, just dump him and find another one. You know?
successful if you find the one and get married and have 2.4 children. there's so much structure in our lives. There's very little time for relaxation or even considering what we really might want to do. I would be very intrigued to know what you mean by women should have rules.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
So first of all,
She didn't say women should have rules. She said society needs rules with freedom, is what she said. So again, she's straw manning. This woman, the woman in red, is fucking out of her depth, okay? And I think this is the problem. As I said earlier, Dunning-Kruger. We have people who are often incredibly out of their depth that come in to have conversations with people who are not out of their depth, and then they think that they have a valid point, and it's like you don't have a valid point, and you're paraphrasing to create a straw man, and then you think that you're winning. Go and watch any conversation. You know, what was that one I was watching? Is it on Jubilee? I'm gonna have to do it, because it was like Jordan Peterson talks to like 19 fucking morons, you know, and about Christianity or something, and it was just like two of the people that were there was so rife with Dunning-Kruger. They were so obnoxious and so disgusting, and they came in and then they left as if they thought they'd won, and they're walking away like, oh, I'm so smart and I'm so wonderful, and it's like, oh my Jesus, Mary and Joseph. And the beautiful thing is until you awaken and until you awaken to your own narcissistic egoic self, you cannot recognize that you are the problem. You can't recognize that you're the problem. You assume everybody else is the problem. And I think that this woman has got huge amounts of trauma that is unhealed, and then she's going around projecting all of this onto everybody else and believing that she's a conscious, self-awakened, and aware and intelligent woman. And it's like, I don't think you are, babe. I'm sorry.
And I don't mean marriage polygamy. I mean multiple partners. Young people are hooking up. I wrote an article for the Institute for Family Studies on why and the statistics on the hookup culture and what it's doing to young people in terms of their mental health. It's causing them to feel
Yeah, I would agree.
More depressed, more anxious, more embarrassed, having more regrets, self-esteem issues. It's got some major implications, and we're talking, the statistics say 72 to 82%, 72% of young men.
Guys, if you don't know aware, if you're a young person watching this, please, for God's sake, go and watch my videos on Bonnie Blue and this kind of side of degeneracy, because none of it is normal, none of it is healthy, and it will not lead you to happiness. Please, for the love of God, stop partaking in hookup culture. It will leave you feeling unfulfilled, split, and really in hate. And this is coming from somebody that came from a Christian background, was taught one thing, was then indoctrinated into a new ideology by kind of Western media culture, started doing the thing that I thought I was supposed to be doing, autistic, never questioned it, went into hookup culture. It's the worst fucking thing that you can do. I've now gone the absolute opposite. I had periods of time in my life where I celibate and I refused to give myself to people like that didn't deserve it, because that's what hookup culture is. You don't even know these people enough to give yourself to them, so why are you doing it? You know? And you're treating your most valuable resource, yourself, as something that is like that's whatever. Would you let anybody use your phone? Would you let anybody? Somebody just come up and say, "Can I borrow your phone?" I'd be like, "No, it's private. I've got shit on here. You might steal it." If you wouldn't let anybody use your phone, why on earth are you hooking up with people that you've just found on Tinder and you're going a meeting and within a 24-hour period you're fucking them? That is the same. What are you doing? What are we doing? It isn't normal. It's not healthy. It's not spiritually intact. Okay, anyway, ranting. Go and have a little watch of this video because I rant more about it over there. We need to have like a rant count down there and like a swear count down here. How many fucks have we managed to get in? Have we dropped the C-bomb? Probably. And how many times has she started ranting?
And 82% of women, young women, are feeling depressed and anxious after these casual sexual encounters. Tinder has an ad that says, "Meet the love of your night." What it does is it takes something so sacred and intimate, and it turns it into
unimportant,
something not just casual, but it turns it into something irrelevant, unimportant, and dangerous, if you ask me, emotionally dangerous. And it can be physically dangerous. If you're having casual sex, you could get a sexually transmitted disease. AIDS is still around. I think in a way, what we've taught our kids and what I encourage the young people that I work with is that experiment with sex. Care about the people that you're experimenting with. Find people who care about you and who you care about. So that structure.
Can I just counter about this sort of idyllic option of monogamy? In the United Kingdom, the police receive a domestic abuse-related call every 30 seconds. Yet it's estimated that less than 24% of domestic abuse crime is reported to the police. 1 in 4 women in England and Wales will experience domestic abuse in her lifetime. On average, nearly 2 women are killed a week in this country. And I know that America has a similar story, but probably worse because there's guns. This is around the world. It's the same in Australia. It is not an either or. It's not that women were so happy and fulfilled in the 1950s because their husbands would go to work. And I mean, watch Mad Men, which is it's a sort of researched idea of how things often were for women then and men, and how, Don Draper would go off into the city. He would have a fulfilling career. Then he would sleep with any number of women and come home to his wife who knew he was having affairs, who could sense it, who could vibe it, who could smell the perfume, and had to just put up with it until she couldn't any longer. Mm. And she was at risk of STDs because he was going out and doing whatever he wanted.
It's just this dichotomous thinking again. It's like this or that, this or that. It's a nightmare or it's a utopia. Maybe it's neither of those things. Maybe it's hard work that can happen when we all do the personal work together. It's like, yes, the men weren't doing the personal work in the 1950s, but were the women doing the personal work? Like, where were your boundaries? if you're accepting a behavior for you, you're also complicit in your abuse. And I know this is a really difficult one, and I'm not blaming women for this situation, but a lot of the reasons why we pick bad men because we haven't done the personal work before us. You draw in somebody that's on the same level as you, and then you end up in an abusive relationship. And I speak from experience here. So, I know this isn't coming from judgment. This is just coming from, honesty. If you are coming from a perspective where it's like, I need to be with somebody, I can't be on my own, then you draw yourself into abusive relationships because you're not picking people because you want to be with them. You're not picking people who are good people. And we see this quite a lot. And that's not monogamy. That's necessity. That's you not doing the personal work. It's you not taking time to pick a partner. Yeah, you can take time to pick a partner and they can still end up being a dickhead and whatever. That's why we have divorce. That's a good thing. But ultimately, in the same way, it's like the men aren't doing the personal work on how to manage their emotions, on how to manage, how to not go around, getting their dick wet and so forth. That's because they're victims of the society of hookup culture just as much as the women are victims of society. So it's like to sit there and blame monogamy for it is disingenuous, and to sit there and blame men for it is disingenuous when we all have our part to play in the relationships that we have. And if you're having a relationship that isn't good, you have to have some responsibility in that. Because if you don't, then you're just in a victimhood mindset, and then you've lost all empowerment. At that point when we just blame the other person, we have lost all power over the situation, and the only person that can fix the situation is the person who we're blaming as the
idea that a sort of monogamy is this utopia, and since we've gone into a more hookup culture, I still think there's a hell of a lot of pressure for people to find the right one. Yes, people hook up before they find the right one, but there is pressure to have the rom-com ending. Most people, if they're hooking up, are hooking up to have sexual satisfaction while they are looking for a longer-term relationship, or they're not, and they're really happy single, and they're finding fulfillment. And that is the spaciousness and the freedom and the autonomy to do that. I love that women can choose that now. I love that women can say, I'm really happy single. This settling for someone who's not good enough for me, or it doesn't suit me, or it doesn't fit me, doesn't have to happen for me anymore. I can live my full self, and maybe my career is more important to me, or fulfilling, or my friendships, or my desire for travel. I love that we have options. I want the women watching this to appreciate all the options that they have. All the options that they have. If they want to be single and they want to hook up, if they're looking, but in the meantime having that sexual freedom, I want them to have it all. But if what they want is this monogamy that you're talking about, to find the love of their life.
This is this is the problem, and it's a good question I think he's about to ask, is that, okay, we can't have it all, okay, because if we have a society that pushes everything, there is no structure to provide anything. So if we have a structure that just says, like, yeah, you can have hookup culture, you can have monogamy, it's like, this is where we're at now, where you can't find a good man, you can't find a good woman, because everybody's like doing like 5,000 things. You can't do things. I turned Jamaican then. You can't do 5,000 things. Don't do that accent. You can't do 5,000 things and do them all well. You can only do like a million things mediocrely, and this is where we're at the moment. You know, you want to be a career woman, you want to be a good mother, you want to be a good wife, you want to run a marathon, it's like, okay, great, but you're going to do all of those things mediocrely. You cannot have it all. And this is another thing about feminism that pushes you, is like, you can have it all, and it's like, no, you can't. You can try and have everything and be a really burnt out, mentally unwell, frazzled woman that has fuck all in her life and has loads of mediocre shit. That's what you can have, because you can't do it all. And the idea that you can do it all is completely and utterly unreasonable. It's unreasonable. And this is some of the things about feminism that pushes, like, we can do it like men. It's like, men can do things differently to women because their hormone profile is completely different. They run in 24-hour cycles. We run in 28-day cycles. You know, for 2 months, 2 weeks of the year, 2 weeks of the month, we're not in a headspace to be doing the things, like, to be going, doing. Like, we have periods of time where we're doers, where we're resters, where we're like, you know, we're cosseting and we're calm and we're knuckling down. And then there's other times when we're more in a feminine energy. To try and step outside of what we are hormonally is ridiculous. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. And this is where so many women are so burnt out and mentally unstable and unhappy and unhealthy, because we're trying to live life like men. It's like trying to be summer all the time. Let me just be summer all the time. Let me be summer all the time. Bitch, you're not summer all the time. We are autumn, we're winter, and we're spring. And until you recognise that, you are not going to be a happy, fulfilled woman, because you cannot be summer all the time, bitch.
I ask, do you think that there is a cost to hookup culture and casual sex in regards to the implications it has on women, as Erica was implying, psychologically? And is that more adverse in women than men?
I think human beings can suffer from too much choice. Like, we know that if you put 800 varieties of jam out on a supermarket shelf, people will buy less jam than if you put out 8, because they get confused and they just think, oh God, I don't know, none of it then, and they walk away. I think the fact that we have young people sitting in a bar on a Hinge date, and while that person goes to the bar, they're like, what else is out there? I think that's bad for human beings. Mm-hmm. I think that is bad for women, for men, for non-binary people. That's bad for everybody.
But this sort of sacredness, Erica was alluding to a sacredness of sex itself.
Yes, I think that is not a thing, that we are somehow finding women find.
Again, it's just that she straw mans. So she hears something, she makes up in her mind what she thinks that she's heard, and then she starts arguing the thing that she thinks she's heard, so then she can feel like she's right. And this is shit debating 101, and it's people who have Dunning-Kruger, like 101, because instead of listening to what you're saying, you are thinking about how you're going to argue, and you're missing what is actually being said. She didn't say that women find sex more sacred than men. What she said is that sex is a sacred act. Period. And that it should be treated as such. And again, because this woman is so entrenched in this dichotomy within her own mind, she cannot hear what anybody else is saying. And so if you can't hear what anybody else is saying, and you cannot actually hear the points anybody's saying, and then as soon as somebody says something that's controversial to your point, instead of listening to what they've got to say, because they might have a valid point, you think you hear what they say, create a straw man, and then start arguing about it and being like, that bitch said this, which is basically every single person that I ever see on the internet at this current moment in time. You're not having conversations with people, and you're also not learning anything. You're not learning anything because you're not listening to anything. You are too egoically entrenched in trying to win the argument instead of trying to learn something. And she'll say, I misheard. No, you didn't mishear. You didn't mishear. You didn't like what you heard. It didn't fit in line with your cognitive dissonance, so you misrepresented it, argued it, so your ego can feel good that you do know what you're talking about when you don't. I hate being autistic. I don't know autistic.
Is better suited to the average preferences of men than of women. So the average preferences of men are more likely to be towards the having lots of partners, jumping into bed really quickly.
Would agree.
end of the spectrum, basically. And this is what
Hormone.
psychologists call sociosexuality. So men are generally more unrestricted in their sociosexuality than are women. And hookup culture favors the highly sociosexual. And actually, you can see this if you look at campus dating cultures and sexual cultures, which are interesting because in a way university campuses are almost a closed environment. You've got all these young horny people hanging out, not very much to do, and like interacting with one another. And on campuses which have more men than women, so the women are the scarcer resource, basically, assuming everyone's heterosexual, right? They tend to have more conservative sexual cultures, so more monogamy, less hooking up, people wait longer to have sex, etc. On campuses where there are fewer men and more women, which increasingly is true of all universities, actually,
60
because
to 40,
exactly, you have the opposite. You have more hookup culture because basically the
So
men are
in
the
actual female-led societies, hookup culture is not a thing. How interesting. How very interesting. How very interesting. When women remember that they're the prize instead of just a quick fuck, they lead men, which is what the feminine is supposed to do. The divine feminine is supposed to lead men back to the higher form of themselves in spirituality. When women realize who they are and sit within their power, they lead men to what is good for women. Feminism is a flip-flop from patriarchalism, whatever, and patriarchy. And because it's a flip-flop, it's not rooted in things that are matriarchal, because it's a reaction instead of a response. Think about that.
resource, and they can set the terms, and men prefer more hookup culture. There are obviously exceptions, this is all true, but at the population level, I think that's really good evidence that actually women en masse don't like hookup culture and are actually engaging with it because they sort of have
Absolutely love her. Okay, let's hear what our little panto dame has got to say. What did she hear? It didn't fit with her ideology or her rhetoric, so what did she hear instead of actually what was said?
Talking about there is very young women who have just left home. It's their first exploration into sex. Now, if you ask a 32-year-old woman in London who knows her body, who knows her preferences, who knows what kind of man turns her on, who can talk about these things and communicate, and you ask her, do you regret that hookup? She'll be like, no, I worked really hard this week. I was literally looking forward to it, and it was wonderful.
Anybody, all the women that I work with, I work with shitloads of women, and the women that I work with, we come off of hookup culture, we go into celibacy, we step away from relationships, we do the personal work. By the time we've done the personal work, if I said to them, do you want to go and give your body to some random bloke because you've worked hard this week? They'd be like, are you fucking joking? No. How is going and having sex with a stranger a reward? What the fuck is this woman talking about? If anybody's listening to her, Jesus, Mary and Joseph, no wonder the world's going to hell in a handbasket, because this woman does not know what she's talking about and has clearly not done any healing work. She's literally come out of a repressive sex cult and then just gone, I'm free! Or ripped all of her clothes off and just gone around shagging everybody and then telling everybody, well, that felt better than the oppression. And it's like, of course that feels better than the oppression, but I tell you what it doesn't feel as good as fucking freedom and actual autonomy and actually looking after yourself and actually caring about yourself and actually having a spiritual sense of self. Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God.
If you ask that same woman, do you regret any of the hookups you had when you were a fresher? She'll be like, oh my God, I didn't know myself. I didn't know how to ask what I wanted. The boys were terrible at it because they didn't know themselves. I don't think universities are a great place to get this information, because that is when you are literally just exploring and going, is this anything?
So again, so these young women don't know what they're talking about, so they shouldn't have an opinion. That doesn't sound very feminist, does it? That doesn't sound like, well, they're really young, so we shouldn't listen to them. That sounds like cherry picking people who you want to listen to back your own point. Either women are all women and they know our minds, or we don't know our minds and they're children that need guidance and structure, which is exactly what that lady was just saying, which you confronted a moment ago. So, what she's saying doesn't make any sense. And don't look to him like, let me turn to the male and hope that he takes my backing because he's a young bloke. What do you think? Are young women dumb too? He's not a misogynist, so he won't agree with you.
And we're all too embarrassed to say what we want or to say how that we like. Oh. So you've got to put into that mix.
Yeah, but imagine if you waited for having a relationship with somebody that you actually liked, that you felt safe with, that you could actually be vulnerable with, and you two as young people were exploring sex and your bodies together, okay, in some beautiful journey that was like had more morals and more sense to it. Imagine what that would be like. Imagine what that would be like. Like, I lost my virginity to some dickhead that didn't even know I was a virgin. Like what the hell was going on there? If I could go back and do that with somebody that I actually liked and actually could be vulnerable with and could actually, you know, was my age and knew me and it was like a beautiful experience. If I could go back and do that with that person and kind of like have the relationship that I have with my spouse now with somebody when I was young, like that with somebody younger, sex would have been a lot more fulfilling. I would have been a lot happier as a person. So I forgot what I was saying or why I was saying this, but, you know.
Boys are told, you got to get laid. You got to get laid. Otherwise you're not cool. Women
are also told that.
You don't want too high a body count. You're going to get slut shamed.
I don't think that's true. I think that was true of her generation. Our generation is not told that. Like, that's what we have now, Bonnie Blue, as a fucking phenomenon. I don't think what she's saying is relevant. Again, I think she's harping back to her previous, you know, her childhood, where she was in a patriarchal cult, which would have been taught those very, very, you know, dichotomous, misogynistic things. And I think you can see that because a lot of what her rhetoric is incredibly subjective, and a lot of it is rooted in the trauma of her childhood.
So you're talking about 18-year-olds who don't know themselves yet. And you're saying when the men are scarce a resource, it's one way, women another way. That is exactly what I would expect to see.
You're talking about 18-year-olds that don't know themselves yet.
What we are currently experiencing in our sexual culture where, yes, there's some structure, yes, there are some rules, but we are much, much more sexually, not just liberal, but even libertine than, say, the sexual culture of our grandparents or whatever. I think everyone ought to be able to agree on that. There clearly is a change now in the sexual culture from previous generations, and it's mostly to do with the pill, as I argue. But the expectation is kind of, as you say, that you just have to figure it out. Like, there isn't a very clear template. Yes, maybe there isn't. I think that, Deborah, you're actually right that most people do in the end aspire to monogamy and having children and everything. But there's also an expectation that you're supposed to experiment a bit in the meantime, and it's kind of actually weird to be a virgin on your wedding night. And I think that, yes, I mean, girls have to tread this really difficult tightrope where on the one hand they are at risk of slut shaming, but they're also at risk of being called frigid. They are much, much more at risk actually of being called frigid than in previous
Yeah, like when I was a kid, I think that, you know, and this wasn't that far back, I'm a millennial, so when I was younger, I think being called a slut was a bad thing, but you'd be better off being called a slut than you would be being called frigid. Like, being called frigid was a lot worse than being called a slut.
And the idea that we can escape from social judgment around our sexual choices is probably not realistic. I think that basically that's what humans are like. We do just tend to be judgmental about this. But anyway, I don't think it's very wise to subject girls to this experience, is how I would put it. To say that you have to go through the hookup culture.
I know people who are opting out.
Yeah, I don't like the way she's interrupting there, but I think, and I'm really glad that this older woman is just like taking the fucking, like, because I think that she's kind of knows herself. I think the other younger woman is maybe a little bit more respectful. As you can see that, whatever his name is, I've forgotten his name now, he's having to, Ben? No, I can't remember what his name is. He's having to come in and kind of like say, and what do you think? Because actually these two women are quite, you know, the red jacket lady is a very dominant personality, which we tend to see with people who have done in Hookup. And the other lady is like a respectful academic who knows what she's talking about. She's like, bitch, you're stupid, but doing it in a really respectful manner. And the other lady is like, I'm not going to interrupt. So I think that what we see is actually that women now and men now are just kind of having to like filled with all these problems that have been created by kind of freedoms that have been elicited on them with no structure. And so what, you know, and as a psychologist, what I see is that all these problems are created, and then we're just dealing with the cleanup all the time. It's like, oh well, that didn't work, so that's fucked all of our kids up, so now we're having to deal with it in adulthood. Oh, that didn't work, and we've been seeing that pretty much for the last like 70 years, where we're just introducing new shit that hasn't been tested. We don't know if it works, and it doesn't work, and then we're just dealing with it instead of kind of like looking looking back, and trying to piece it all together and being like, okay, but that didn't work, we need to kind of change something and bring it in, is that we just keep kind of like blind, it's the blind leading the blind, and we just keep throwing shit at the wall hoping something sticks, and none of it works, because we're not really kind of like looking at things cohesively and kind of saying, okay, well, what's working in, because we break everything up in society. It's like, okay, the psychologists don't talk to the economists, and the economists don't talk to the do you know what I mean, to the educationalists. So it's like, because we break everything up into this like thing instead of dealing with it holistically, the important information that's saying like, well, that thing isn't working, kind of gets missed. And then because we're missing the bigger picture, which is what I'm a big picture thinker, being an autistic ADHDer, I'm a big picture thinker, and so I see this big picture where I seem to see all of this, and I might be wrong, I don't think I am, but who would think they're wrong and put it on the internet. But, when we bring all these things together, with me and my hyper focuses on many different industries, when we bring all of these things together, we can kind of see that none of it's working. Like, I've worked in education, I've worked in psychology, I've worked in mental health, I've worked in, in a lot of different fields. I've forgotten what I've worked in now. But I've worked in a lot of different fields, and in each of those fields, I get quite obsessed and go into a lot of hyper focuses around these different topics. And so you can see, from my perspective, a very strong pathway that runs through all of them that basically says a lot of the things that these things are doing that are all very similar across these different industries or whatever. They're not working, and it's not working because it's leading to a society that isn't happy and healthy. So what we need to do is come back to having conversations, like big table conversations between everybody, where we can kind of look at, well, when we did this happened, and it's like, okay, well, that's that, and mental health is lower, and more men are committing suicide, and actually loads of people are having sex, and that's not worked. So we can kind of say, like, okay, maybe the false liberation, sexual liberation of women in the 1960s was this turning point that actually created a lot of problems. If we were able to kind of go X equals Y equals Z, we could maybe then holistically put in some practices to remedy some of the damage that's been done. But because people don't really look at things in big picture, I think that a lot of neurotypical people are very small picture, they're like ant level kind of looking, and I'm like a crow level looking, and they both have their benefits. Like, I miss details a lot because I see bigger pictures, and this is why we all need to work together. It's not that neurotypical people are shit and neurodivergent people are bad. Like, we can all offer something the same. It's the same that not all men are bad people. Men aren't bad people, women aren't bad people, vice versa. If we all work together, we can all give each other something that will bring in a lot more measured and tempered approach. I don't know where we're up to, but I think let's have a little break. I might come and do a part 2 of this. Let me know if you'd like me to continue watching the rest of this debate. I'd love to hear what you think about life in general, and if you're not following, give me a follow and a like, and I'll see you all soon, guys. Take care of yourselves.